And joining us is a gentleman we haven't heard in a while, but he's no stranger to the Observer. Let me say a pleasant good evening to Attorney at Law, Mr. Kiel Taklalsingh. Good evening,
Hi,
sir.
good night. Good night to you and good night to your listeners.
Thank you so much. You've studied, of course, the recommendations made by that's the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform, the NACCR, which, of course, headed by former House Speaker Barindra Sinanan. And coming out of that, it's quite clear the PNM is saying no to fixed election dates and no to proportional representation for general elections. Many have weighed in on this, those political scientists, and they believe that it's a matter of maintaining the status quo, and it's basically politics that's playing out. What say you?
Well, two things. I tend to agree that exercises such as these tend to be more about political influence and an attempt to sway the political population as opposed to actually wanting to bring about meaningful change. We've had several commissions and several studies in our country. Quite recently, we had the study and commission of inquiry into the divers, that issue. We have had CLICO, we have had the UF report. No meaningful changes have taken place. So unfortunately, we have a tradition in this country whereby these types of reports are done at great expense. No meaningful changes are taking place, and it seems to be that they are done more to satiate the public and public demands for accountability as opposed to actually wanting to make meaningful changes and reform. But when it comes to constitutional reform and constitutionalism, my own personal bias is that as long as the population is discussing constitutional ideas, constitutional reform, constitutional proposals such as fixed date elections, proportional representation, etc., I think it's a good thing because discourse brings about change eventually. No constitutional reform happens overnight. You have the American experience with the Federalist Papers. It took many articles by philosophers such as James Madison before changes could have taken place. The British experience with the Magna Carta coming all the way up to the petitioners of right, these types of historical antecedents, they take place over time. So as long as we're having the conversation, I think that's a good thing. I agree with you that it's quite surprising that the very commission that is put in place by the current administration, which comes forward with reform, with concrete proposals, are being rejected by the PNM and for no good reason. What on earth could be the justification for opposing a fixed election date? That doesn't necessarily take away the right of a political leader of a certain political party to say they want to call early elections. But what on earth could be the objection to saying, well, look, at the end of the day, we have a fixed date for election so that all parties and political actors specifically know when an election is going to take place at worst case. What on earth, for instance, could be the objection to having a non-political Speaker of the House, unless, of course, you want to be able to wield influence, as we have seen taken place, because in my personal view, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the President of the Senate, their conduct sometimes is extremely biased towards the ruling party. That is my view. It could be a view of a different person. But my view is that these office holders are extremely biased. So what on earth if the committee, as in the current case, says, well, look, we need to have a non-political Speaker of the House and a non-political President of the Senate. You have these low-hanging fruit, which is crying out for constitutional change in our country, and is actually documented by your own report. And by your own report, I mean a report commissioned by the current PNM government. Why on earth not enacted, unless, of course, you want to maintain the status quo, maintain majority rule, and maintain a sort of dictatorial hold over our country and its processes and institutions.
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, when you talk about the fact of a fixed date, and you're right, and when you look at what many of these analysts are weighing in and saying, is that these recommendations rejected by the PNM's Constitution Review Committee over the weekend basically does not, however, serve the interests of the party. Now, if we're talking about having public consultation, and having people make their input. That in itself, Mr. Taklalsingh, would of course bring about some sort of social maturity. Are we even at that point where we're able to have the discussions in a very mature and a very comprehensive breakdown of these things, how they're going to benefit us as citizens? And that's the part that I don't seem to understand, and many people don't seem to understand that.
I agree with you, and I find it highly ironic that the report is actually named or entitled, quote unquote, "We the People." We the People is a slogan in the historical sense, where you had a shift of power and sovereignty away from absolute rulers, away from what we call the ancient regime, away from what you called the monarch, into the hands of the people, meaning that people would have the power through their representatives, through parliament, through their democratically elected representatives in a parliament. That is what We the People stands for. It was a shift away from rulers such as the crown and the king and sovereignty into the hands of the people. That is the name of the report chosen by this committee. It is a move to have people have a say in decisions which affect their lives and have a say in the way we govern ourselves and the way we govern our affairs. And here you have, in some instances, people have said, look, we want proportional representation, we want a non-political Speaker of the House, we want fixed date elections, we want more participation as a people in the governance of our affairs, and you're not doing it, and you've outright rejected this as a party, when in fact the ruling party controls the government. So what does that say? And the other thing I want to get into, if I could just segue a bit, you had the Prime Minister trying to admonish the United National Congress and the UNC for not participating in the constitutional discussion. Nothing could be further from the truth. The United National Congress stands as the party which, in my respectful view, has contributed perhaps the most to constitutional progress in our country. It is the United National Congress that gave us the Freedom of Information Act. Anytime someone files a constitutional case in this country, Mikey, anytime someone files a constitutional case, the first thing they do is they file a Freedom of Information, because you have to get the information to understand if your constitutional rights are violated. One of the major pieces of legislation that the UNC passed was the Judicial Review Act. That allows you to challenge public authorities when they abuse their power, and it is a fundamental constitutional principle that power ought not to be exercised arbitrarily or irrationally or unfairly. So it is the United National Congress, in my respectful view, that has progressed constitutional rights and human and fundamental rights in this country. So to say that we have not participated in the progression of constitutionalism in our country is an absolute untruth and should be admonished and criticized very severely. Further to that, the report actually cites the Ramadan Committee, which was a committee that was set up by the United National Congress and builds upon the Ramadan Committee reports. So what on earth is the Prime Minister talking about? And on top of that, if you want to get buy-in from the population, what good does it do you to simply come out and start to attack the United National Congress about non-participation? Why not send a report with a cover letter and say, look, UNC, what are your views on this? What are you willing to pass? What are you willing not to support? Let us know. Let us meet halfway in the middle. But of course, the Prime Minister, in his usual arrogant self, doesn't decide that he would take that approach. He decides to simply say, well, this is my report and this is what the PNM is going to support and not support. Well, good luck, because you're not going to get it passed in Parliament when you come to the majorities that are required under our current constitution.
And I agree with you. And again, a lot of these games that are being played out has nothing to do as far as with the citizens. I mean, here it is, you're saying public consultation. You want Joe Public to add his or her voice to something, which you said, according to the Prime Minister, when he congratulated the committee, maintaining that constitutional reform was essential for the country's future well-being. I want to repeat that. Where constitutional reform is essential for the country's future well-being. You are saying this is for the people, by the people, in the interests of the people, but yet still you pick and choose exactly what is being said by the people. It goes right back to saying the voice of the people is the voice of God, but you only listen conveniently to that voice. Why then should the opposition take that seriously? And as you mentioned, he said, I'm disappointed to say at this stage that the group of people who are in fact, an arm of the government and parliament under the UNC leadership, I am disappointed to say that our country's opposition chose up to this point not to partake in this process. Well,
It's an unfortunate comment,
yeah,
extremely unfortunate
very
comment.
unfortunate. But then you're giving credence to it. You're actually giving some life to it because apparently they had all rights not to participate. Because at the end of the day, are you seriously listening to the voices of the people who are saying that we want a fixed election date? I mean, at this time and age, are we still going to have that old Manning saying it's in my back pocket and I have it, and you'll come and make a pronouncement today and play with it tomorrow? I mean, if you're serious about it, then democracy should never be a game, especially when it comes to the interests of the citizens.
Absolutely, and it seems that he isn't really respectful, or he doesn't really respect quote-unquote we the people. It seems to him the report is we the party, not we the people. So what we the party and the PNM say is right for the country, he wants to implement, not we the people who participated. And secondly, I don't think he's listening to the voices of the people. He might be listening to his own internal voices in his mind. And I suppose that brings us to his other coat of arms comment where he says, look, this is what I want to change unilaterally, which is absolutely, again, against the very grain of what the constitutional report reports. And, you know, I want to say, yes, it is a fair political argument to say that this entire committee and constitutional reform exercise was a political charade intended to distract the population from the real issues that are afflicting us right now, such as crime, such as poor healthcare, such as a bad management of the economy, etc. I understand that, and that is a very understandable political argument to make. But nevertheless, we have a report before us, and there are some good points in the report. And you've mentioned some of them: fixed date elections, etc. And some of there are good things in the report which no doubt people have been clamoring for in the population for many years. The problem is when that you have the Prime Minister coming to say, well, I am going to pick and choose what I will decide and ignore the will of the people, when you have to engage the opposition in a meaningful way in order to pass reform, because that is the way our parliament works. You can't get these reforms passed unless you have the support of the opposition, which currently controls a certain amount of seats in the parliament, and you require a certain majority to get some of these reforms passed. That is a fact that everybody knew even before you commissioned this report. So you always knew that you had to engage the opposition in a meaningful way, and a meaningful way does not simply mean appoint a commission, a report will be produced, and the opposition must come to a consultation. Why not ask the United National Congress, well, do you want to appoint one or two commissioners and let us make this thing meaningful? Or the report is there, write to the opposition leader and say, well, opposition leader, what in this report are you prepared to accept, if anything? If there are things that you are willing to accept with modification, let us know and let us see if we can get some meaningful change. That is the way a mature government ought to operate, but instead what we have is a real dictatorial type of tendency by the PNM and by Dr. Rowley, the Honorable Prime Minister, to simply say, well, this is what is going to happen, and this is what we support, and this is what I'm going to change. Too bad for you. You didn't participate. Absolutely, absolutely unacceptable in a modern democratic state.
And let's look at this. And looking at what has been accepted, I think the issue here, the underlining issue here really and truly is trust.
Yes.
That's the bottom line. So referendums were accepted. So what does that mean?
So I think in terms of referendums, and we have to be very clear. A referendum or a referendum procedure has to be incorporated into the laws of the country to say that decisions can be made with a referendum being made. Now, I support referendum for certain things. So let's say that they want to go about changing the final court of appeal from the Privy Council to the CCJ. That is a decision that is so ingrained and entrenched and important to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago that you have to engage what is called quote-unquote direct democracy. You go straight to the people and you ask each and every citizen, if you care enough, come out, put your vote on our ballot and let us get a poll from the population as to what they support. And that has been done around the Caribbean. The removal of the Privy Council has actually been rejected by several other Caribbean states when it's gone to referendum. On the other hand, there are some decisions which they may be matters of economic affairs, they may be matters of highly specialist issues. You can't ask the ordinary citizen to give a view on that when they may be uninformed, and that is why you have a representative form of government by way of parliament. You elect representatives to take decisions on your behalf because you feel that you trust them, you feel that you have confidence in them, and you feel that they are capable to understand the issues, consult with you, get your views, and go in parliament and vote. So referendum is not simply just, we say referendum. There are many shades of referendum. It's a very technical issue, and I need to see further proposals on it. But in principle, I accept that referendum can be used in certain issues, such as whether or not we want to change the Privy Council to the final court of appeal, which of course I totally disagree with.
No, I agree with you on that. And again, the underlining here has to be trust. And that's the problem. I mean, we have seen so many independent offices and bodies being politically compromised. We're talking about the selection of a commissioner of police, and the list goes on. I'm going to be honest with you right here on The Observer. I would rather take my chance with that individual who is waking up in Manchester, England, on that morning, having his UK breakfast of eggs and beans and what have you, heading to the Privy Council. He doesn't know my social status. He or she doesn't know not even my ethnicity. He or she doesn't even know my political affiliation. They are just going to base everything on the facts that are presented to them. And if you have a political opponent that you could simply pick up the phone and compromise somewhere in the region, these are things that one have to look at. I'd rather take my chances with the Privy Council.
I agree with you fully. There is absolutely, in my view, absolutely no chance of any government in the Caribbean influencing the judges of the Privy Council. That is what I take security and comfort in. We know, for instance, in the local scenario, that the Prime Minister holds a power over the Chief Justice as to whether or not to initiate an investigation into certain allegations against the Chief Justice. So whether or not it was done because of favors exchange, which I cannot say, or whether it's simply a matter of perceived bias or perceived control over the judiciary, that is a question that has to be answered ultimately by a committee, by an investigative committee. But the point is, what I am sure about is that when you come to decisions of judicial integrity, or when you come to decisions or deciding judicial matters, the one thing that you want is absolute neutrality. And I am fairly sure that the Privy Council is absolutely neutral to these matters. And there was a very Eric Williams, who was the progenitor of the PNN, Dr. Rowley's progenitor, who said that in a small society, it is good to keep a body such as the Privy Council to treat with that, because everybody knows everybody in Trinidad. And that, of course, is no slur on any judge currently of either the High Court or the Court of Appeal. But the point is that the quality of decision-making, the quality of judicial arbitration that you get from the Privy Council is the best in the world. Unrivaled. It is the best in the world, so why give it up? And it is a fact that the world is moving towards London for judicial determinations. London is the seat of arbitration around the world. People in Hong Kong go to London for arbitration. People in East China, people in South America, people all over the world. When you have international disputes, you go to London because London is the seat of preferred arbitration. So why are we giving up the Privy Council, which is all automatically attractive to foreign investors who want to know that if they get in a dispute with another party, or the government of Trinidad and Tobago, they will get a neutral outcome. Why would you give up that at this time? And I'm not saying that at some point in time, we may have to revert to a Caribbean Court of Justice, but we have so much problems in our own judiciary. Our own judiciary is marred with controversy. Every time there's a promotion in our judiciary, there's a problem. The current Chief Justice has been found by his colleagues in the Court of Appeal to have acted potentially unlawfully in relation to the Mass CSA's issue. Marcia is an issue. That is a finding of the Court of Appeal of 3 senior Court of Appeal judges, that the very Chief Justice, who is the head of the JLSC, may have acted unlawfully, and that matter is now on the way to the Privy Council. So why on earth would I be willing to give up the Privy Council that is untainted, uninfluenced, unbiased, in determination of critical judicial issues for a local system which is unfortunately at this time mad? What I think you need to do is reform the JLSC, reform the way we appoint and promote judges in Trinidad and Tobago, and then let us have the discussion about whether we should move the Privy Council to the CCJ.
I agree. Increased autonomy for Tobago, that was accepted.
And I am a supporter of that. I make no bones about it. Let me just declare my bias. I do some work for the THA, etc. So just in case anybody wants to, they see Taklalsingh representing THA and he's taking this up, I declare my bias. That's not a problem. But that has no reason. That has nothing to do with my view. My view is that the THA and the THA is fully fit. They are filled with competent people and they require more power to treat with certain executive decisions in the Tobago House of Assembly and for the people of Tobago. That is not to say Tobago should secede from Trinidad and Tobago, but they must enjoy some autonomy. For instance, Tobago is now facing a rising crime problem. We know that. Why should the THA be saddled with the incompetence of Fitzgerald Hines and the incompetence of the current Commissioner of Police in treating with their crime problem? Why can't the THA get together and decide who they want to be the Commissioner of Police in Tobago to deal with the crime problem in Tobago and affecting citizens of Tobago, be it citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but in particular in the locality of Tobago? Why not?
Yeah, you're right.
Yes.
Reformation of the Salaries Review Commission, accepted. That was accepted, all right.
Well, fair enough. That's a political football on both sides.
But
Right?
there you go. Reformation of the responsibilities of the office of the DPP, that was accepted.
There has to be oversight of the DPP, and I have said this. In England, prosecutorial decisions are reviewed all the time by a superior body. So, where you have a decision to prosecute, the DPP says, I want to prosecute Mikee K, right? Then you have no problem because you have a trial, you have to go before a judge, a jury, a court of appeal, and a Privy Council that will all review the decision. However, where the Privy Council, where the DPP says, I am not going to prosecute somebody, what justice is there for victims of crime who may not have justice for their family members because the DPP says, well, I am not going to prosecute this person and that person, or I am not going to prosecute a political agent. In England, there is actually a prosecutorial review body filled with former judges and prosecutors, etc., which reviews, in England it's called the Criminal Prosecution Service, reviews the CPS decision and says, hey, you need to prosecute this matter because there is actually sufficient evidence for you to launch a prosecution. So I agree with that.
And reformation of the powers and role of the president, that was accepted.
I understand the executive president argument. I think that has come about because of the recent breaking of convention, I would say, by the PNM in appointing Mrs. Kangaloo to Her Excellency Mrs. Kangaloo to the office of the president. She's someone who is entrenched in the politics, entrenched in PNM politics, and now she has become the president. And whether or not she's fulfilling the role in a neutral or ostensibly neutral position, the point is she's someone who went around and said that she had to, saying that she had to preach the gospel of the PNM, and she's also responsible for appointments such as the Integrity Commission, such as the JLSC, who appoint judges in this country. So you see why people would have a problem and say, well, if you're going to make that position, if you're going to compromise that position politically, well, then we need to have a say in who's going to be there.
Yeah. Reformation of the appointment of the Commissioner of Police, we mentioned that earlier.
Well, and that is also a difficult one. We know that there was reform sometime in 2007 when Mr. Panne and Mr. Manning got together and said, look, they want to move away from this type of political appointment to the PNM, but we've seen the Prime Minister now intervene in a process to appoint a Commissioner of Police, so much so where in my respectful view, it seems that the motive was to get at Gary, so to speak, quote unquote. I am no great fan of Gary Griffith, I have made that clear, but that does not mean we ought to disqualify the man from a job which he was clearly performing quite competently.
I
right?
agree. Yeah.
So so I whatever my personal feelings, to sometimes I think he goes a bit far on Facebook, etc., and those things. But that doesn't mean he wasn't being a good commissioner of police.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, making me and my family feel safe in our homes.
I agree with you on that. The right to a trial in a reasonable time was accepted.
Absolutely needed in our country right now. The law under ceremony in Aransing is that we do not have a right to a trial in a speedy trial as there is in Jamaica. So you have people languishing in jails for many years, 10, 15 years, and they can't bring a constitutional motion or claim in the High Court to say that there's delay in their trial and they just have to wait. If you implement that right, then people, if they feel that they are delayed in the coming to fruition from time of charge to time of trial, they can have their trial faster and they can have a trial within 5 years, be it guilty, innocent, at least they have their day in court.
All right. And persons with disabilities, that was accepted. I mean, that in itself.
Well, I think that may be a bit too far in my respectful view, because you have the Equal Opportunities Tribunal, which is allowed to intervene and determine whether or not persons with disabilities, and in fact, the jurisprudence has been expanded quite recently to include sexual harassment in the workplace. So even if women or men are being sexually harassed in the workplace, the Equal Opportunities Tribunal can arbitrate over that, and they can deal with discrimination, so that the discrimination complaints need not be elevated to a constitutional status per se, but you have protection in the law to treat with that.
And reformation of sexual orientation rights. That was rejected.
I think that's a public sort of issue. Many people talk about whether or not you have the right to be identified as what gender you want to be. That is a thing internationally. I think Trinidad, we're a more conservative society, and we have said you are what you are born as.
I agree with you on that, and I think that going into the election, that may not be popular for the ruling party.
It won't be, and I don't think there is a public clamoring to change it. Although I do believe that regardless of what person's sexual orientation may be, sexual preferences, they ought not to be discriminated against. I am one who say, for instance, there are certain benefits that a married couple and a man and wife may get. If two men live together, decide they take that decision, they want to live together, they should be the same benefits, because fortunately or unfortunately, that is the decision they've made in their private life. They ought not to be discriminated against it.
Yeah, it goes back again to trust and social maturity. I mean, are we there yet? Are we? And I think the majority of people will be like, listen, live and let live, because really and truly that does not affect, my space. It's not a matter of invasion.
The issue came about recently. I filed a case against Customs, and I'm supposed to get a decision in September, where the law prohibits adult toys. And the underlying argument is what people do in their bedroom is their damn business.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that brings us to the end of our interview. I want to thank you. Any closing comments? Go right ahead.
All I will say is that while I accept that this may very well be a distraction, a sort of troop for us to run behind, I do think that people ought to familiarize themselves with the report, ought to familiarize themselves with the constitutional issues which ultimately affect each and every citizen's quality of life in Trinidad today.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure as always. Best of luck to you and your entire team, and keep up the good work.
Take care.